The big meeting hall of the Galactic Forum was full of noise and worry that day. Ambassador Jinwoo walked slowly to the speaking place where humans always stood. He had been doing this job for 30 years, and his face showed how tired he was. From all the fights and arguments, his helper Hana stood behind him, holding many electronic papers that told the story of how other aliens treated humans badly for so many years. Jinwoo looked around the huge room and saw thousands of different creatures from all over the galaxy. The tall blue Althari sat in their fancy chairs looking down at everyone else with their big purple eyes. The crystal people, called Vec, made tinkling sounds as they moved, and their bodies caught the light from above. The gas creatures known as Nephros floated in their special tanks and spoke through machines that made their voices sound like wind. For 300 years, humans had tried to be good members of this galactic family. They had given away their best medical secrets for free so that sick aliens could get better. Human doctors had saved millions of lives on planets far from Earth. The powerful energy machines that humans invented now gave electricity to half of all the worlds in the galaxy. Human farmers had taught aliens how to grow food better, and no one had to starve anymore on dozens of planets. But every time humans asked for something back, the same thing happened. The Althari would make faces and say human ideas were stupid. The Vec would say that human science was too simple and not good enough. The Nephros would vote together in big groups and always vote against whatever humans wanted. It did not matter how much humans helped or how many problems they solved. When it came time to make decisions, humans were always told no. Jinwoo remembered when humans first found a way to make sick people healthy again by fixing their broken body parts inside. Human doctors were so excited because this meant people would not die from diseases that had killed millions before. But when they tried to share this discovery with the Forum, the Althari said it was dangerous. The Vec said humans did not understand biology well enough. The Nephros said they needed to study it for 50 years before anyone could use it. Meanwhile, people kept dying from diseases that humans could already cure. The worst part was not just that they said no, the worst part was how they said it. The Althari would laugh and make jokes about how humans were like children playing with toys they did not understand. The Vec would speak in their musical language, and when the translation machines worked, everyone could hear. They were calling humans primitive and backward. The Nephros would float in their tanks and make their wind sounds that meant they thought humans were too violent and stupid to be trusted. 3 months ago, something happened that changed everything. The human survey team working far from Earth found something amazing. It was a huge field of rocks floating in space, and these rocks contained special metals that were needed to build the ships that traveled between stars. These metals were so rare that finding them was like finding a mountain made of gold. Jinwoo and all the human leaders were excited because finally they had found something that would make other aliens respect them. Following all the galactic laws, humans reported their discovery right away. They filled out all the correct papers and asked for the normal mining rights that any species got when they found something valuable in space. The human survey team had worked for 2 years to map all those floating rocks. They had fought off space pirates and fixed broken equipment and survived when their air recycling machines almost failed. Now they waited for the Forum to give them permission to collect the valuable metals they had found. But the Forum meeting about the asteroid field did not go the way humans expected. The Althari stood up first and said humans were too aggressive in how they took things from space. They said humans would damage the rocks and waste the valuable metals inside. The Vec made their tinkling sounds and said human mining equipment was too crude and would contaminate the pure metals. The Nephros floated in their tanks and said humans could not be trusted with such important resources because they might use them to build weapons. Then the vote happened. Jinwoo watched as species after species voted to give the mining rights to the Althari consortium. The same aliens who had called the discovery dangerous now wanted to take it for themselves. The same creatures who said humans were too primitive now claimed they could do the job better. The floating gas beings who worried about human violence now supported giving everything to the Althari, who had the biggest war fleet in the galaxy. As the votes were counted, Jinwoo felt something break inside his chest. It was not anger exactly, and it was not sadness. It was something deeper, like when a person finally understands a truth they had been avoiding for a long time. For 300 years, Humans had believed that if they just tried harder, and gave more, and proved themselves better, then eventually the other species would accept them. But now Jinwu realized the truth. Other species did not want to accept humans as equals. They wanted to keep humans as junior partners who would do the work while others got the rewards. When the final vote was announced, the Althari had won by a huge number. The asteroid field that humans had discovered would be mined by Althari machines. The metals that human survey teams had found would go to Althari worlds. The profits from years of human exploration would fill Althari bank accounts. Jinwu stood at his speaking place and looked around the room at all the alien faces. Some looked satisfied, some looked uncomfortable, but none looked surprised. This was just how things worked in their galaxy. That night, Jinwu sent a long message back to Earth. The message was encrypted with the best human codes, and it went to the unified council that made decisions for all human worlds. The message was simple, but it would change everything. He told them about the vote and about the pattern of discrimination that had lasted for centuries. He told them about the medical discoveries that were blocked and the trade agreements that were refused, and the mining rights that were stolen. He told them that after 30 years of trying to work within the system, he had finally understood that the system was designed to keep humans down. The message ended with a recommendation that would shock the galaxy. Jinwu advised the Unified Council to begin a complete withdrawal of human participation in galactic affairs. He suggested that all human ambassadors should resign their positions. He recommended that human scientists should return to human space. He proposed that human engineers should stop maintaining alien equipment. He advised that human doctors should focus on helping human colonies. He suggested that human merchants should end their trade with alien worlds. 3 days later, Captain Taman of the survey ship New Sol received orders that confused him. At first, he was told to power down the beacon that marked the asteroid field as a human discovery. He was told to delete all the survey data from the ship computers. He was told to return to Earth immediately without speaking to any alien officials. The captain had spent 2 years mapping that asteroid field with his mixed crew of humans and friendly aliens who had become like family. But as he read the orders again, he began to understand what was happening. Captain Taman looked out at the asteroid field one last time. The rocks floated silently in space, holding their treasure of rare metals. Soon Althari ships would come to claim what humans had found, but they would find something different than they expected. The detailed maps that showed where the best metals were hidden would be gone. The survey data that revealed which rocks were safe to mine would be erased. The technical specifications that explained how to extract the metals without causing dangerous reactions would disappear as the New Sol turned toward Earth. Captain Taman made a decision that he did not report to anyone. He quietly copied all the survey data onto a secure storage device. The information about the asteroid field and dozens of other valuable discoveries that humans had made over the years would not be lost. It would go home to Earth, where people who appreciated human work could decide what to do with it. The galaxy had chosen to reject human partnership, but they would soon learn the cost of that choice. The message came on the first day of the 12th month, exactly 1 year after Ambassador Park Ji-woo had walked out of the failed negotiations at Harmony Point. It was a simple transmission sent on all frequencies used by the Galactic Council, but the words seemed to echo across the entire galaxy like thunder after a long silence. Fleet Commander Young Hyun-woo stood on the bridge of the human flagship Indomitable Spirit as he prepared to speak the first official words that any human had addressed to the alien powers in exactly 365 days. His crew watched him with mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. They had all played their part in the greatest psychological warfare campaign in galactic history. The message was brief and delivered in the same calm, polite tone that Ambassador Park had used when she announced humanity's withdrawal from negotiations. Jung Hyun-woo looked directly into the communication array and spoke clearly. "We have considered your original proposal and find it acceptable. We are prepared to resume negotiations at your earliest convenience." The response from the remnants of the Galactic Council was immediate and desperate. Within hours, messages were flooding human communication, networks from dozens of alien species. All of them carried the same basic message. "Please talk to us. We accept your terms. We need to end this madness." The galaxy that humanity returned to was completely different from the one they had left in silence. The mighty galactic console had shattered into dozens of warring factions. Trade routes that had operated for centuries were now dangerous war zones. Entire star systems had been evacuated. As civilian populations fled, the fighting Admiral Kim Tae-hyung was among the first alien commanders to respond to the human message. His once mighty fleet had been reduced to less than half its original strength after months of fighting other console forces. His crews were exhausted and demoralized. His supply lines had been cut off and his government was on the verge of collapse. He sent a personal message to Fleet Commander Jung Hyun-woo, begging for human intervention to stop the fighting. The admiral, who had once threatened to crush humanity for their arrogance, was now pleading for human help to restore peace to the galaxy. Ambassador Park Ji-woo returned to Harmony Point for the new negotiations, but the conference room was very different from the one she had left. The proud alien delegates who had once dismissed human demands as unreasonable were now desperate survivors of a galactic civil war. The Vraxian representative looked tired and defeated. His beautiful feathers were dull, and many were missing from stress and combat injuries. The Zephyrian delegate's crystal form was cracked and clouded. The musical tones of her voice had become harsh and discordant. The Calthonian military advisor was missing 2 of his 6 arms and walked with a heavy limp. These were not the same arrogant beings who had treated humanity as inferior children. They were broken creatures who had learned the hard way that their mighty alliance could be destroyed by something as simple as silence. The negotiations that had once seemed impossible were completed in less than 3 days. Every demand that humanity had originally made was granted without argument. The 3 star systems that humans wanted for colonization were handed over immediately. The mining rights to the asteroid belts were transferred to human control. Additional concessions that had never been part of the original discussions were offered freely. The alien delegates signed every agreement without even reading the details carefully. They were so desperate to end the communication silence and restore some kind of stability to their shattered galaxy that they would have agreed to almost anything. Captain Lee Min-ho watched the signing ceremony with mixed emotions. Humanity had achieved a victory more complete than anyone had dared to imagine. They had gained everything they wanted and more. But the cost had been the destruction of a galactic civilization that had taken thousands of years to build. Dr. Yoon Na-yoon submitted her final report on the psychological effects of the silence strategy. Her analysis showed that the alien species had never recovered from the initial shock of human withdrawal. Their social nature made them completely vulnerable to this kind of psychological warfare. They simply could not function without constant communication and confirmation from others. The silence had revealed a fundamental weakness in the Galactic Alliance. The different species had never truly trusted each other. They had been held together by necessity and mutual benefit rather than genuine friendship. When that trust was tested by uncertainty and fear, it collapsed almost immediately. Engineer Song Haeun calculated the economic impact of the year-long crisis. Industrial production throughout the former console territories had dropped by 70%. Trade volume had fallen by over 80%. Billions of beings were now living in poverty and uncertainty. The economic system that had supported galactic civilization was in ruins. The rebuilding process would take decades and would require massive human assistance. The species that had once looked down on humanity as primitive newcomers were now completely dependent on human technology resources and leadership. Dr. Kim Soo-jin analyzed the long-term implications of humanity's victory. The psychological trauma experienced by the alien species would affect their behavior for generations. They would never again dismiss human capabilities or treat humans as inferior beings. The fear of another silence would shape their diplomatic relations with humanity for centuries to come. Commander Choi Dae-ho supervised the gradual restoration of communication between human and alien forces. The process was slow and careful. Many alien commanders were still afraid that any wrong word might trigger another period of silence. Human officers had to reassure their former enemies that the communication blackout was over. The alien crews who had spent months in constant fear and paranoia found it difficult to adjust to normal operations. Some had developed severe psychological problems from the stress of uncertainty. Others had become so used to seeing threats everywhere that they could not function in peaceful conditions. Fleet Admiral Park Kyung-soo coordinated the massive humanitarian effort that humanity launched to help the surviving alien populations. Human ships carried food, medical supplies, and reconstruction materials to dozens of worlds that had been devastated by the Civil War. The irony was not lost on anyone. Humanity had caused the crisis that destroyed the Galactic Council, but they were also the only power capable of fixing the damage. The aliens who had once threatened to crush human civilization were now completely dependent on human charity and assistance. Captain Lee Min-ho reflected on the events of the past year as he watched human and alien crews working together to restore damaged space stations. The strategy had worked beyond their wildest expectations, but it had also taught humanity a sobering lesson about the power they possessed. The ability to remain silent when others expected communication had proven to be a devastating weapon. The social species of the galaxy could not understand or defend against this kind of psychological warfare. They were helpless against an enemy who simply refused to engage, but with great power came great responsibility. Humanity now found itself in the position of galactic leadership that they had never sought. The destroyed alien civilizations looked to humans for guidance, protection, and support. The galaxy that had once dismissed humanity as irrelevant now depended on them for survival. The negotiations at Harmony Point established humanity as the dominant power in the galaxy, but they also established human responsibility for the welfare of all the species that had been damaged by the silence. The victory had come with a price that would have to be paid for generations. As the first year of the new galactic order began, humanity faced challenges they had never imagined. They had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon was the choice not to use any weapon at all. The silence had been more effective than any military force, but it had also revealed the dangerous responsibility that came with such power. The galaxy would remember the year of silence as the time when everything changed. The mighty Galactic Council had fallen not to superior military might, but to something as simple as the absence of words. Humanity had learned that in a universe full of social species, the power to remain silent was the ultimate weapon. The war that the aliens had called impossible to fight was over, and humanity had won without firing a single shot. The victory belonged to those who understood that sometimes the most powerful action was to take no action at all. Dr. Young-soo stood in his laboratory at the Galactic Medical Research Station, looking at 15 years of his life work scattered across the white tables around him. The alien scientists he had worked with for so long were in meetings discussing budget cuts, but Young-soo already knew what they would decide. His project to help people grow back lost arms and legs would lose its funding, so the Althari could build bigger weapons instead. The doctor had spent countless nights in this same lab, working with creatures from dozens of different worlds to find cures for diseases that killed millions. His breakthrough discovery about how to make damaged cells repair themselves had already saved more lives than he could count. Sick children on Vec crystal worlds could walk again. Old Nephros floating in their tanks could think clearly again. Althari soldiers who lost limbs in battles could grow new ones. But none of that mattered now because the military research was more important. Young-soo opened his personal computer and began copying files onto small storage devices that could not be traced. The medical formulas he had developed over 15 years fit onto devices smaller than his thumb. Each device contained treatments for different diseases and instructions for building the machines needed to make the medicines. Work that had taken him decades to create was now being quietly moved from galactic computers to human storage devices. The copying took 3 hours, and during that time other human workers throughout the research station were doing the same thing. Dr. Min-ai from the genetics department was downloading her research about how to make crops grow in bad soil. Engineer Dong-hyun from the power systems team was copying blueprints for the fusion reactors that kept the station running. Teacher Soo-jin from the education center was saving lesson plans that had helped alien children learn faster than ever before. None of them talked about what they were doing, but they all knew. The message from Earth had been clear and simple. Human citizens were advised to return to human space as soon as possible. All human research and development should be secured and transferred to human facilities. Personal safety and security could not be guaranteed in alien territories. The message did not give a deadline, but everyone understood that time was running short. Dr. Young-Soo finished copying his files and then did something that would puzzle alien investigators. For months afterward, he carefully deleted certain key pieces of information from the main research computers. The formulas were still there, but the crucial measurements that made them work were gone. The instructions for building treatment machines remained, but the specifications for the most important components disappeared. Anyone trying to use his research without his help would find that nothing worked the way it was supposed to. At the same time, similar things were happening throughout. The Galaxy human engineers at power plants began submitting resignation letters, citing family emergencies back on Earth. They took with them detailed knowledge of how the fusion reactors really worked, and left behind operating manuals that somehow missed the most critical maintenance procedures. Human teachers at universities across dozens of worlds started talking about career changes and better opportunities in human space. They packed up educational materials that had revolutionized how alien children learned mathematics and science. Human merchants who had built profitable trade routes connecting alien worlds suddenly discovered that their contracts needed to be renegotiated. Their trading ships began returning to human ports, carrying not just goods but also detailed information about alien industrial capabilities and resource needs. Trade agreements that had lasted for decades were quietly allowed to expire. Business relationships that had seemed permanent began dissolving as humans cited changing market conditions that their alien partners could not quite understand. The most important departures were the ones that no one noticed. Human technicians who maintained critical infrastructure systems throughout the galaxy began taking vacation time and never came back. Human programmers who had written the software that controlled everything from traffic systems to banking networks submitted 2-week notices and disappeared. Human translators who made communication between different species possible started declining new assignments and returning to Earth. Ambassador So Young had been preparing for this moment since she received her father's message from the forum. 3 months ago, she had been the rising star of human diplomacy, following in Jinwoo's footsteps and working to build better relationships between humans and aliens. But the asteroid field vote had changed everything. Now she sat in her office writing a resignation letter that would be quoted in history books for generations to come. The letter was short, but its words would echo across the galaxy for years. So Young wrote that humans had come to the stars seeking partnership but had found only condescension. They had offered friendship, but received only closed fists in return. Humanity was withdrawing not in anger but in disappointment. The galaxy had taught humans that their contributions were valued, but their opinions were not welcome. So Young sent copies of her resignation to every major news organization in the galaxy. Within hours, her words were being translated into thousands of languages and broadcast to billions of creatures across hundreds of worlds. Alien leaders who had never paid much attention to human diplomats suddenly found themselves trying to explain why their most helpful galactic neighbors were leaving. The first signs that something was seriously wrong appeared within 2 weeks of the human departures. The Vec crystal farms that produced food for dozens of worlds began showing problems with their crops. The special fertilizers that humans had developed were running out, and no one knew how to make more. The crystal farmers tried to contact the human scientists who had taught them the farming methods, but found that all the humans had returned to Earth. Althari warships conducting training exercises discovered that their targeting computers were developing strange problems. The weapon systems would work perfectly during simple tests but failed during complex battle simulations. The Althari engineers examined the systems carefully but could not find any obvious damage. The human technicians who had maintained these systems for years were gone, and they had not left behind detailed repair manuals. The grand libraries of Nephros Prime contained the collected knowledge of thousands of civilizations, but suddenly the gas creatures found they could not access most of it. The translation programs that converted different languages into their wind speech were failing one by one. Without these programs, the vast databases of information became useless because no one could understand what they contained. The human linguists who had built the translation systems had disappeared and taken their knowledge with them. Trade networks that had operated smoothly for centuries began experiencing mysterious disruptions. Cargo ships would arrive at their destinations, only to find that the automated unloading systems did not recognize their manifests. Banking transactions between different worlds started failing as currency conversion programs stopped working properly. Communication systems that allowed instant messages between star systems began dropping connections and losing data. What had seemed like isolated technical problems were actually symptoms of a much larger crisis. The galaxy was discovering that human innovation had become woven into the fabric of interstellar civilization in ways that no one had bothered to document or understand. For 3 centuries, humans had quietly solved problems and improved systems without demanding credit or recognition. Now that they were gone, their absence created holes in galactic society that no one else knew how to fill. Dr. Young-Soo boarded the last human transport ship leaving the research station and looked back at the laboratory where he had spent the best years of his life. His alien colleagues stood at the windows watching the ship depart, but none of them understood what they were really losing. They thought they were seeing a few disgruntled humans going home after a political disagreement. They did not realize they were watching the beginning of the end of the galaxy, as they knew, as the transport ship jumped to hyperspace and began its journey back to Earth. Dr. Young-Soo opened a message from the Human Unified Council. The message was simple, but its implications were enormous. All human citizens returning from alien territories were to report to debriefing centers where they would share everything they had learned about alien technologies and capabilities. The galaxy had rejected human partnership, but they had also revealed their complete dependence on human knowledge. The silent exodus was complete, but its consequences were just beginning. Fleet Admiral Kyo-sung stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching as urgent messages poured in from across the galaxy. The newest human warship was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. It used technology that humans had kept secret, while they shared everything else with alien civilizations. Now, as emergency communications flooded the ships, communication systems, Kyo-sung realized that the galaxy was finally understanding what they had lost. The first disaster happened at the asteroid field that had started everything. The Althari Consortium had sent their best mining ships and most experienced crews to extract the valuable metals that humans had discovered. But without human expertise, the operation went wrong in ways that no one had predicted. The automated mining drones that worked perfectly on other projects somehow triggered a chain reaction that destroyed not just the equipment, but made the entire asteroid field radioactive. Commander Jae-ho, who had served as a technical advisor to Althari mining operations for 10 years, watched the disaster reports from his new position on Earth. He knew exactly what had gone wrong. The Althari had never understood that certain metals in the asteroid field became unstable when exposed to their standard extraction lasers. The human survey data that Captain Taemin had deleted contained warnings about this danger, but the Althari had assumed their superior technology could handle any problems. The loss was measured not just in money, but in strategic materials that the galaxy needed to maintain its transportation networks. The rare metals in that asteroid field were essential for building the hyperspace engines that allowed ships to travel between stars. Now, instead of a treasure trove of resources, the galaxy had a floating cloud of radioactive debris that would be dangerous for thousands of years. Engineer Boksu had spent 12 years working with the Vec crystal beings to maintain their power systems. The crystalline creatures had never bothered to learn how the fusion reactors actually worked. They just followed the maintenance schedules that Boksu had written for them. Now, with Boksu back on Earth, and no other humans available, the Vec were discovering that their power grid was failing in ways they could not fix. The first Vec power plant failed 3 weeks after Boksu left. When the crystal beings tried to restart it following their maintenance manuals, they found that the instructions assumed knowledge that they did not have. The manuals said to adjust the plasma flow regulators, but did not explain how to recognize when the regulators were working properly. The Vec engineers made their best guesses and caused a cascade failure that knocked out power to an entire continent. Within 2 months, half of the Vec worlds were experiencing rolling blackouts. The crystal beings who had dismissed human engineering as primitive now faced the prospect of their entire civilization returning to pre-industrial technology. Their leaders sent desperate messages to Earth offering huge payments for human technical assistance, but the messages went unanswered. Dr. Hanul had tried for years to get the galactic medical community to take her research seriously. Her approach to treating genetic diseases was completely different from traditional alien medicine, and many alien doctors had called her methods too theoretical and impractical. But Hanul had proven that her treatments worked by curing diseases that alien doctors said were incurable. Now, with Hanul back on Earth and her research withdrawn, alien medical systems were collapsing. The problem was not just that humans had taken their knowledge away. The problem was that alien doctors had been using human medical treatments without understanding the science behind them. They knew that Hanul's medicines worked, but they did not know why they worked, or how to adjust them when patients had complications. Now, as the medicines ran out and alien doctors tried to make new batches, they discovered that they had been following recipes without understanding chemistry. Plagues that had been controlled for decades began spreading again as human-designed. Vaccines lost their effectiveness. Alien doctors who had relied on human medical research found themselves unable to treat diseases that should have been simple to cure. The delicate balance of Hanul's genetic therapies required constant monitoring and adjustment, but without human guidance, the treatments became dangerous toxins. The political implications were even more serious than the technical failures. The Althari military machine that had dominated the galaxy for centuries was built on technology that humans had developed and maintained. Their most advanced weapons used targeting systems that humans had designed. Their fastest warships used engines that human engineers had optimized. Their communication networks used encryption that human programmers had written. Admiral Kyo Sung received intelligence reports showing that Althari military exercises were becoming disasters. The proud warrior race that had looked down on humans for being too peaceful now discovered that their weapon systems failed during complex combat scenarios. Their ships could fly in straight lines, but the navigation computers that calculated hyperspace jumps were producing random errors. Their communication systems that had coordinated fleets across multiple star systems were becoming unreliable. The Nephros trade empire faced complete economic collapse. The gas beings had built their wealth on complex algorithms that predicted resource flows and managed currency exchanges across the galaxy. But these algorithms had been written by human economists and maintained by human programmers. Without human oversight, the trading systems began making increasingly erratic decisions. Currency values that had been stable for decades started fluctuating wildly as the computer systems lost track of supply and demand. The Nephros had never understood how their own economy worked. They had simply trusted the human-designed systems to manage everything automatically. Now, as those systems failed, unemployment rates soared, and riots broke out on dozens of worlds. Even worse, the Nephros discovered that their leaders had been making political decisions based on economic forecasts generated by human computer models. Without those models, the floating gas beings had no way to predict the consequences of their policies. They were governing a galactic trade empire while completely blind to economic trends and market forces. The galactic forum itself began experiencing system failures, as the artificial intelligence networks that managed the massive bureaucracy started shutting down. Human programmers had designed these systems to handle the complex interactions between thousands of different species and millions of different laws and regulations. Now, as the AI systems lost access to human maintenance, the entire galactic government began grinding to a halt. Council Speaker Zethra of the Althari called emergency sessions almost daily, but found that basic governmental functions were becoming impossible. The translation systems that allowed different species to communicate during meetings were producing increasingly garbled results. The voting systems that recorded decisions were losing data. The databases that stored galactic law were becoming corrupted. Most frightening of all, the various alien species were beginning to realize that they had never actually understood how their own civilizations worked. They had grown so dependent on human innovation that they had stopped developing their own technical capabilities. The Althari could build weapons, but only by following human blueprints. The Vec could grow food, but only using human agricultural methods. The Nephros could manage trade, but only through human computer systems. 3 months after the human withdrawal began, Admiral Kyo Sung received the first official communication from an alien government. The message came from the VEC Collective and was carefully worded to avoid sounding desperate. They offered what they called a mutually beneficial partnership that would involve sharing technological insights. The reality behind the diplomatic language was obvious. They were offering to pay tribute in exchange for human technical support. Similar messages began arriving from other alien governments. The Althari offered military alliance and territorial concessions. The Nephros proposed exclusive trading agreements and economic partnerships. All of the messages had the same underlying theme: the galaxy was ready to negotiate, but they still assumed they were dealing with equals rather than recognizing that the balance of power had fundamentally shifted. Admiral Kyo Sung forwarded all the messages to Earth's Unified Council. Without recommendations, he knew that the human leadership had already decided on their response. The galaxy had spent 3 centuries teaching humans that their contributions were valuable, but their opinions were worthless. Now they would learn the difference between being needed and being wanted. Council Speaker Zethra stood in the private chamber that had been built for the most secret meetings in galactic history. The Althari leader looked around at the representatives of every major civilization and saw something that had never existed before: fear in the eyes of species that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. The chamber had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, but never had it hosted a meeting about how to survive without the help of a species they had always considered inferior. The emergency session had been called after detailed reports showed the true scope of the crisis facing galactic civilization. The VEC crystal worlds were going dark one by one as their power systems failed. The Althari military was discovering that their most advanced weapons were becoming unreliable. The Nephros trade networks were collapsing as their economic systems produced increasingly chaotic results. Every major civilization was facing problems that they could not solve without human expertise. Zethra began the meeting by reading a report that shocked even the most experienced galactic leaders. The report detailed how thoroughly human innovation had become integrated into every aspect of interstellar society. From the fusion reactors that powered their cities to the computer systems that managed their governments, everything depended on human knowledge that was now gone. The proud species that had dismissed human contributions for centuries were discovering that they could not function without them. The VEC representative made clicking sounds that translated into panic as she described how her people's power grid was failing. Their crystal cities that had glowed with beautiful light for millennia were becoming dark as the fusion reactors shut down one by one. The VEC engineers had tried to repair the systems using their own methods, but every attempt made the problems worse. They needed human engineers to return, but they did not know how to ask for help without admitting that their entire civilization was helpless. The Nephros delegation floated in their portable atmosphere tanks and made wind sounds that conveyed desperation. Their trade empire that had connected thousands of worlds was falling apart as the computer systems that managed intergalactic commerce began making random decisions. Currency values were changing by the hour, causing economic chaos throughout the galaxy. Unemployment was rising on every Nephros world, and their leaders were facing riots and revolution. Even the proud Althari had to admit that their military supremacy was crumbling. The targeting systems on their warships were producing errors that made their weapons useless in combat. Their communication networks were failing during military exercises, leaving fleets unable to coordinate their movements. Most embarrassing of all, their newest warships were stranded in space because the navigation computers could not calculate hyperspace jumps accurately. Zethra listened to each report and felt the weight of galactic leadership crushing down on her. The Althari had built their power on military strength, but their military depended on human technology. The other species had their own areas of expertise, but all of them relied on human innovation to make their civilizations function. The galaxy had spent 3 centuries taking human contributions for granted, and now they were learning the cost of that mistake. The debate that followed would be remembered as either the galaxy's greatest moment of humility or its final act of stubborn pride. Some representatives argued that they should immediately send delegations to Earth to negotiate the return of human cooperation. They pointed out that every day of delay meant more systems failing and more people suffering. Others insisted that accepting human demands would set a dangerous precedent that could lead to human domination of the galaxy captain. Minho received the first official overture while his ship was patrolling the border between human and alien space. The message came through diplomatic channels and was signed by representatives of 12 major civilizations. The carefully worded document offered what they called a comprehensive partnership agreement that would benefit all parties involved. But Minho could read between the lines to see the desperation behind the formal language. The alien proposal offered humans expanded territory, permanent seats on all major galactic councils, and guaranteed voting rights on important decisions. In exchange, they wanted human experts to return to their previous positions and resume maintaining the systems that kept galactic civilization functioning. The proposal was generous, by the standards of previous alien offers, but it still assumed that this was a negotiation between equals rather than a recognition of human superiority. Minho transmitted the proposal to Earth without comment, knowing that the Unified Council had already made their decision. The response came back within hours and was shorter than the alien message by a factor of 10. Earth acknowledged receipt of the proposal and indicated that a formal response would be provided through appropriate channels at the appropriate time. The diplomatic language was polite, but the message was clear. Humanity was not ready to negotiate. The desperation became public when the Nephros economy completely collapsed. Their currency, which had been backed by complex trading algorithms, became worthless overnight when the computer systems that managed currency exchange began producing random numbers. Banks throughout Nephros space closed their doors as they discovered that their electronic records had become corrupted beyond repair. Unemployment rates that had been low for centuries suddenly jumped to 50% as automated systems failed throughout Nephros society. The gas beings, who had never needed to work with their hands because machines did everything for them, now found themselves unable to perform the most basic tasks. Riots broke out on dozens of worlds as hungry. Nephros demanded that their leaders fix problems that the leaders did not understand. The Vec faced a different, but equally serious crisis as their crystal cities began going dark. The power failures were not just inconvenient, they were deadly. Crystal beings needed specific frequencies of light to survive, and the failing fusion reactors could not maintain the proper energy output. Vec hospitals reported increasing numbers of patients suffering from light deprivation syndrome, and doctors predicted mass deaths if power was not restored. Soon, Dr. Sujin watched the crisis unfold from her new laboratory on Earth and felt conflicted emotions. Part of her wanted to help because she remembered her Vec colleagues as decent beings who had always treated her with respect, but she also remembered the years of having her research dismissed and her suggestions ignored. The same aliens who were now dying from power failures had voted to cut funding for human projects dozens of times. The most desperate plea came from the Althari military command. Admiral Bok-Ra sent a personal message to his human counterpart, Admiral Kyosung, begging for technical assistance to repair critical military systems. The proud warrior who had spent decades looking down on human pacifism was now admitting that his fleets were helpless without human expertise. The message described how Althari warships were stranded throughout their territory because navigation systems were failing. Military bases were going offline as power systems overloaded communication networks that had coordinated the Althari war machine for centuries were producing static instead of clear signals. The species that had built their identity on military superiority was discovering that their weapons were useless without human maintenance. Admiral Kyosung read the message and remembered the countless times that Althari officers had dismissed human military advice. The same aliens who had called humans too peaceful to understand warfare were now begging for help from the species they had ridiculed. Every human in the military remembered being told that their strategies were too cautious and their weapons were too weak. Now the galaxy was learning which species really understood how to build effective military systems. The Forum's final attempt at reconciliation was the largest diplomatic mission in galactic history. Representatives from every major civilization gathered in a massive fleet and traveled to the edge of human space. The fleet included over 300 ships, carrying thousands of diplomats and millions of tons of gifts. They came offering everything from rare minerals to territorial concessions to exclusive trade agreements Ambassador Jin Woo met the delegation at a space station in the neutral zone between human and alien territory. The same diplomat who had spent decades being ignored and dismissed now found himself in the position of receiving tribute from the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The irony was not lost on him as species that had never listened to human opinions now hung on his every word. The alien offers were impressive by any standard. They proposed giving humans entire star systems as sovereign territory. They offered to make human languages official throughout the galaxy. They suggested creating a new galactic government, with humans as permanent leaders. But their proposals still carried the same assumption that had driven humans away. They believed this was a negotiation between partners, rather than a recognition that humans held all the real power. Jinwoo listened, politely, to each presentation, and thanked the delegates for their generous offers. Then he delivered a response that would reshape the balance of galactic power. The terms that humans would accept were simple, but revolutionary. Humanity would resume limited cooperation with the galaxy, but not as junior partners seeking approval from established powers. Human innovations would be shared through control.